Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to a series of videos in which I am reading you a book. I am reading you Barchester Towers by Anthony Trollope, which is the story of a battle that is taking place for control of the spiritual life of the town of Barchester. The Bishop of Barchester, headquartered in Barchester Cathedral, died at the beginning of the book. And the bishopric was handed over to a man named Dr. Prouty, who has a very bossy and imperious wife, and also a scheming and manipulative personal chaplain named Mr. Slope. They came to Barchester with the aim of making it their own, putting it under their thumb, and enacting a whole bunch of reforms, all of which grated against the faction of ecclesiastics already in Barchester who want to keep doing things the way they've been doing things for 100 years. That factor is led by Archdeacon Grantley, who kind of hoped that he would be the new bishop. And one of the members of that faction, a little bit unwillingly, is old Mr. Harding, who used to be the warden of Hiram's Hospital. He was one of the main characters in the earlier book here, the warden. He's a very kind and gentle person, whereas Archdeacon Grantley is made for battle, just like Mr. Slope is made for battle. And so battle lines were drawn in Barchester. And that is the main story here. And each side will work whatever advantages it can get. For instance, Mr. Harding's daughter, Eleanor Bold, is a wealthy widow. She has £1,200 a year of her own money. And so she became, and by extension Mr. Harding became, a pawn in this battle, because Mr. Slope entertained the idea that perhaps he would marry her. It would be very nice to have a wealthy wife. That would be very nice for her. Plus, she's beautiful. And he thinks, well, if I'm going to increase my chances for getting her to agree to marry me, I should probably smooth the path for her father to return to being warden of Hiram's Hospital, because another man has been chosen in his place, and that seems to be a settled matter. Those sides of the battle, Dr. Grantley swearing that if Eleanor Bold even considers the idea of marrying Mr. Slope, he'll never look her in the face again. The bishop vying with both his controlling wife and his controlling chaplain, and also wanting to be in control of Barchester. Those sides of the battle are clearly defined. And we have a new combatant, Mr. Arabin, who has been brought in by Dr. Grantley specifically for the purpose of helping to fight the fight against Mr. Slope. We haven't really met Mr. Arabin yet, but he is also clearly part of one side or the other of that war. The only X factor in this whole story is a result of the reforms that the new bishop has enacted at Barchester. One of the reforms that the new bishop enacted was that he didn't want any more absentee clergymen. Forever and ever at Barchester, you could hold a fairly high position in the church, get thousands of pounds a year. Keep in mind, at a time when an honest worker in a town or on a farm could be lucky if he got £150 a year. That would be considered a very, very good wages. It was common in Barchester and all around the country for curates in high positions for clerics in high positions to have these incomes that are guaranteed by the church. They're guaranteed by, tithings and collections and whatnot, and rents, and they are just absent. So your position brings you in, let's say, £3,000 a year. You will hire a curate to do that, to do all the job, to keep your office open, to keep your church running, to deal with your parishioners, to give your sermons on high holidays and holy days and whatnot, and you will pay that curate a few £100 a year out of the $3,000 that you get, so that you are getting the rest of it for literally doing nothing. The new bishop cracks down on that, and one of the primary offenders was Dr. Vesey Stanhope, who had spent God knows how many years, 15, 16 years on the shores of Lake Como in Italy, far from Barchester, not even thinking about Barchester, working on his butterfly collection with his family, who grew up in Italy. And they are called home. It is made clear to them by Mr. Slope, the chaplain, that they don't want the results if they refuse. They had better come home. So they do, and they're a freak show. They're the Addams Family. They are a genuine X factor. It is hoped by Dr. Grantley and by Mr. Harding that Vesey Stanhope will be on their side in this war in the cathedral. But it's hoped on the other side, too. That the Stanhope family is a bunch of X factors, not only in ecclesiastical matters, but also because one of the daughters of the Stanhope family, Signora Madeline Neroni, is partially lame. She can't walk without badly limping, so she mostly drapes herself on couches to the admiration of all because she is stunningly beautiful and incredibly manipulative. And another of the children in the Stanhope family is the only boy, Ethelbert, Bertie, who is lovely. He's lovely to look on. He's mild. He is completely one of those people, dangerous in women, deadly in men, who don't excite the precautionary instincts of any newcomers. It's a good thing that your guard is up around a newcomer. You don't know who they are yet. You don't know what their motives are. And some people, they don't excite those instincts at all. And sometimes they mean no good. So they can be very dangerous. He's one of those people. You just want to pet him. And they are genuine X factors in this. We don't know what side they're on or what effect they're going to have. And they are beguiling. The Stanhope family is beguiling. Deborah McDonald made a comment on yesterday's video saying she can't get enough of the Stanhopes. Well, and we're going to give her more of the Stanhopes, because chapter 19 is Barchester by Moonlight, where we are going to follow up on something we learned in the last chapter, which is that Eleanor Bold has been invited to the Stanhope family for tea and a little chess. And it's a perfectly innocent social call. We are told in the last chapter that she is as innocent as her baby. She has a little baby boy, little Johnny Bold, who's dumb, so cute. I don't know how many of Trollope's readers would have caught on. The Victorians could be very sentimental, but I hope we can all agree that a mother who is as innocent as her baby is a bad mother. But she agrees to go to this get together. She's been invited. She can't think of a reason to refuse. And she is told that nobody will be there. It will just be the family. But we raised the suspicion last time that it's possible that Mr. Slope will be there. And he is utterly romantically infatuated with Signora Neroni, as are all the men in Barchester, including the bishop. But he has hopes, he has designs on Eleanor Bold. He's not planning on marrying Madeline Stanhope. He's not planning on marrying her, not least because, as far as anybody in Barchester knows, she's already married. We get the strong impression that we're told in an earlier chapter that her Italian husband is clearly meant not to be mentioned or ever seen again. But nevertheless, she's not divorced. So let's see what happens in this chapter, shall we? This is Barchester by Moonlight. There was much cause for grief and occasional perturbation of spirits in the Stanhope family, but yet they rarely seemed to be grieved or to be disturbed. It was the peculiar gift of each of them that each was able to bear his or her own burden without complaint and perhaps without sympathy. They habitually looked on the sunny side of the wall, if there was a gleam on either side for them to look at, and if there were none, they endured the shade with an indifference which, if not stoical, answered the end at which stoics aimed. Old Stanhope could not but feel that he had ill performed his duties as a father and a clergyman, and could hardly look forward to his own death without grief at the position in which he would leave his family. His income for many years had been as high as £3,000 a year, and yet they had among them no other provision than their mother's fortune of £10,000 a year, or £10,000, not a year, just total. She has £10,000 of her own money. He had not only spent his income, but was in debt. Yet all of this he seldom showed an outward sign of trouble. It was the same with the mother. If she added little to the pleasures of her children, she detracted still less. She neither grumbled at her lot, nor spoke much of her past or future sufferings. As long as she had a maid to adjust her dress, and had those dresses well made, nature with her was satisfied. It was the same with the children. Charlotte never rebuked her father with the prospect of their future poverty, nor did it seem to grieve her that she was becoming an old maid so quickly. Her temper was rarely ruffled, and, if we might judge by her appearance, she was always happy. The Signora was not so sweet-tempered, but she possessed much enduring courage. She seldom complained, never, indeed, to her family, though she had cause for affliction which would have utterly broken down the heart of most women as beautiful as she, and as devoid of all religious support. Yet she bore her suffering in silence, and alluded to it only to elicit the sympathy and stimulate the admiration of the men with whom she flirted. As to Bertie, one would have imagined from the sound of his voice and the gleam in his eye that he had not a sorrow nor a care in the world. Nor had he. He was incapable of anticipating tomorrow's griefs. The prospect of future want no more disturbed his appetite than does that of the butcher's knife disturb the appetite of the sheep. Such was the usual tenor of their way, but there were rare exceptions. Occasionally the father would allow an angry glance to fall from his eye, and the lion would send forth a low, dangerous roar as though he meditated some deed of blood. Occasionally also Madame Neroni would become bitter against mankind, more than usually antagonistic to the world's decencies, and would seem as though she was about to break from her roarings and allow herself to be carried forth by the tide of her feelings to utter ruin and shipwreck. She, however, like the rest of them, had no real feelings, could feel no true passion. Trollope keeps saying this. The Stanhopes are psychopaths. They look normal, but they don't have any inner lives. They don't have any inner feelings. In that was her security. Before she resolved on any contemplated escapade, she would make a small calculation, and then would at last conclude that the Stanhope villa, or even Barchester Close, was better than the world at large. Can you imagine any of the Stanhope family out in the world at large? Maybe Charlotte. They were most irregular in their hours. The father was generally the earliest in the breakfast parlor, and Charlotte would soon follow and give him his coffee, but the others breakfasted anywhere, anyhow, and at any time. On the morning after the Archdeacon's futile visit to the palace, Dr. Stanhope came downstairs with an ominously dark look about his eyebrows. His white locks were rougher than usual, and he breathed quickly and loudly as he took his seat in his armchair. He had open letters in his hand, and when Charlotte came into the room, he was still reading them. She went up and kissed him, as was her wont, but he hardly noticed her as she did so, and she knew at once that something was the matter. "What's the meaning of that?" said he, throwing over the table a letter with a Milan postmark. Charlotte was a little frightened as she took it up, but her mind was relieved when she saw that it was merely the bill of their Italian milliner. The sum total was certainly large, but not so large as to create an important row. "It's for our clothes, Papa, for 6 months before we came here. The three of us can't dress for nothing, you know." "Nothing, indeed," said he, looking at the figures, which in Milanese denominations were certainly monstrous. "The man should have sent it to me," said Charlotte. "I wish he had with all my heart, if you would have paid it. I see enough of it to know that 3/4 of it are for Madeline." "She has little else to amuse her, sir," said Charlotte, with true good nature. "And I suppose he has nothing to amuse him," said the doctor, throwing over another letter to his daughter. It was from some member of the family of Sidonia, and politely requested the father to pay a small trifle of £700, being the amount of the bill discounted in favor of Mr. Ethelbert Stanhope, and now overdue for a period of 9 months. Charlotte read the letter, slowly folded it up, and put it under the edge of the tea tray. "I suppose he has nothing to amuse him but discounting bills with Jews. Does he think I'll pay that?" Jews here meant to stand for, just in general terms, for moneylenders at interest, but also for the Jewish people. It's a tick in Trollope. You're just going to have to get used to. "Does he think I'll pay that?" "I'm sure he thinks no such thing," said she. "And what does he think he will pay it?" "As far as honesty goes, I suppose it won't matter much if it is never paid. I dare say he got very little of it." "I suppose it won't matter much either," said the father, "if he goes to prison and rots there. Seems to me that that's the other alternative." Dr. Stanhope spoke with the custom of his youth, but his daughter, though she had lived so long abroad, was much more completely versed in the ways of the English world. "If the man arrests him," said she, "he must go through the court." "It was thus, thou great family of Sidonia, it was thus that we Gentiles treat thee, when, in our extremest need, thou and thine have aided us with mountains of gold as big as lions, and occasionally with wine warrants and orders for a dozen dressing cases." That's the second mention that we've had of a connection of the family of Sidonia and mountains of gold as big as lions. And that refers to something that was in the culture in Trollope's day. You don't need to think about it. I'm not even sure that it's footnoted in this Oxford edition. I don't think I've ever seen a footnote for it. It had a long history to it. You don't need to worry about it. All you need to know now for this scene is what is obvious, which is that the bills are following the Stanhope family. The bills from Italy are following them to England, and they're not payable. What, and become an insolvent? Said the doctor. He's that already, said Charlotte, wishing always to get over a difficulty. What a condition, said the doctor, for the son of a clergyman of the Church of England. I don't see why clergymen's sons should pay their debts any more than any other young men, said Charlotte. He's had as much from me since he left school as is held sufficient for the eldest son of any nobleman, said the angry father. Well, sir, give him another chance. What? Said the doctor. Do you mean I am to pay that Jew? Oh, no, I wouldn't pay him. He must take his chance, and if the worst comes to the worst, Bertie must go abroad. But I want you to be civil to Bertie and let him remain here as long as we stop. As long as we stop. She's not sure they're staying in Barchester. He has a plan in his head that may put him on his feet after all. Has he any plan for following up his profession? Oh, no, he'll do that too, but that must follow. He's thinking of getting married. Just at that moment, the door opened and Bertie came in whistling. The doctor immediately devoted himself to his egg and allowed Bertie to whistle himself round to his sister's side without noticing him. Charlotte gave a sign to him with her eye, first glancing at her father and then at the letter, the corner of which peeped out from under the tray. Bertie saw and understood, and with the quiet motion of a cat, abstracted the letter and made himself acquainted with its contents. The doctor, however, had seen him, deep as he appeared to be immersed in his eggshell, and said in his harshest voice, Well, sir, do you know that gentleman? Yes, sir, said Bertie. I have sort of acquaintance with him, but none of that can justify him in troubling you. If you will allow me, sir, I will answer this. At any rate, I shan't, said the father, and then he added, after a pause, Is it true, sir, that you owe the man £700? Well, said Bertie, I think I should be inclined to dispute the amount, if I were in any condition to pay him such as I really do owe him. Has he your bill for £700? Said the father, speaking very loudly and very angrily. I believe he has, said Bertie, but all the money I ever got from him was £150. And what became of the £550? Why, sir, the commission was £100 or so, and I took the remainder in paving stones and rocking horses. Paving stones and rocking horses, said the doctor. Where are they? Oh, sir, I suppose they are in London somewhere, but I'll inquire if you wish for them. He's an idiot, said the doctor, and it's sheer folly to waste more money on him. Nothing can save him from ruin. So saying, the unhappy father walked out of the room. Would the governor like to have the paving stones? Said Bertie to his sister. I'll tell you what, she said, if you don't take care, you will find yourself loose upon the world without even a house over your head. You don't know him as well as I do. He's very angry. Bertie stroked his big beard, sipped his tea, chatted over his misfortunes in a half-comic, half-serious tone, and ended by promising his sister that he would do his very best to make himself agreeable to the widow Bold. Then Charlotte followed her father to his own room and softened down his wrath and persuaded him to say nothing more about the Jew bill discounter, at any rate for a few weeks. He even went so far as to say that he would pay the £700, or at any rate settle the bill, if he saw a certainty of his son securing himself anything like a decent provision in life. Nothing was said openly between them about poor Eleanor, but the father and daughter understood each other. They all met together in the dining room at 9 o'clock, in perfect good humor with each other, and about that hour Mrs. Bold was announced. She had never been in the house before, though she had often called, and now she felt it strange to find herself there in her usual evening dress, entering the dining room of these strangers in this friendly, unceremonious way, as though she had known them all her life. But in 3 minutes they made her at home. Charlotte tripped downstairs and took her bonnet from her, and Bertie came to relieve her of her shawl, and the signora smiled on her as she could smile when she chose to be gracious, and the old doctor shook hands with her in a kind, benedictory manner that went to her heart at once and made her feel he must be a good man. She had not been seated for above 5 minutes when the door again opened and Mr. Slope was announced. She felt rather surprised because she was told that nobody was to be there, and it was evident from the manner of some of them that Mr. Slope was not unexpected. But still, there was not much in it. In such invitations, a bachelor or two, more or less, are always spoken of as nobodies, and there was no reason why Mr. Slope should not drink tea at Dr. Stanhope's as well as Eleanor herself. He, however, was very much surprised, and not very much gratified, at finding that his own embryo spouse had made the party. He had come there to gratify himself by gazing on Madame Neroni's beauty, and listening to and returning her flattery. And though he had not owned as much to himself, he still felt that if he spent the evening as he intended to do, he might probably not thereby advance his suit with Mrs. Bold. The Signora, who had no idea of a rival, received Mr. Slope with her usual marks of distinction. As he took her hand, she made some confidential communication to him in a low voice, declaring that she had a plan to communicate to him after tea, and was evidently prepared to go on with her work of reducing the chaplain to a state of captivity. Poor Mr. Slope was rather beside himself. He thought that Eleanor could not have but learnt from his demeanor that he was an admirer of her own, and he also flattered himself that the idea was not unacceptable to her. What would she think of him if he now devoted himself to a married woman? But Eleanor was not inclined to be severe in her criticisms on him in this respect, and felt no annoyance of any kind when she found herself seated between Bertie and Charlotte Stanhope. She had no suspicion of Mr. Slope's intentions. She had no suspicion even of the suspicion of other people. But still she felt well pleased not to have Mr. Slope too near her. He's just incredibly repulsive. Madeline Stanhope would also be repulsed by him if she weren't addicted to manipulating people. And she was not ill-pleased to have Bertie Stanhope near her. It was rarely indeed that he failed to make an agreeable impression on strangers. With a bishop, indeed, who thought much of his own dignity, it was possible that he might fail, but hardly with a young and pretty woman. He possessed the tact of becoming instantly intimate with women without giving rise to any fear of impertinence. He had about him somewhat of the propensities of a tame cat. It seemed quite natural that he should be petted, caressed, and treated with familiar good nature, and that in return he should purr and be sleek and graceful, and above all never show his claws. Like other tame cats, however, he had claws, and sometimes made them dangerous. When tea was over, Charlotte went to the open window and declared loudly that the full harvest moon was much too beautiful to be disregarded, and called them all to look at it. To tell the truth, there was but one who cared much about the moon's beauty, and that one was not Charlotte. But she knew well how valuable an aid her purpose was the chaste goddess might become, and could easily create a little enthusiasm for the purpose of the moment. Eleanor and Bertie were soon with her. The doctor was now quiet in his armchair, and Mrs. Stanhope in hers, both prepared for slumber. "Are you a Whewellite, a Brewsterite, or a T'otherite?" said Mrs. Bold, said Charlotte, who knew a little about everything, and had read about a third of each of the books to which she alluded. And those, Whewell and Brewer and whatnot, those were all books that were common at the time about whether or not there's life on the moon, whether or not there's life on other planets, and what form it takes. "Oh," said Eleanor, "I have not read any of the books, but I feel sure that there is one man in the moon, at least, if not more." "You don't believe in the pulpy, gelatinous matter?" said Bertie. Which might make you think we've wandered into Moby Dick. But no, it's all a reference to these kinds of science speculation books that were out at the time that are no longer read. They might be on Project Gutenberg. A first edition of Whewell's book would probably be expensive, speculating about what, the conditions for life on other planets. "I heard about that," said Eleanor, "and I really think it's almost wicked to talk in such a manner. How can we argue about God's power in other stars from the laws which he has given to rule us in this one?" "How indeed," said Bertie. "Why shouldn't there be a race of salamanders in Venus? And even if there be nothing but fish in Jupiter, why shouldn't the fish there be as wide awake as the men and women here?" "That would be saying very little for them," said Charlotte. "I am for Dr. Whewell myself, for I do not think that men and women are worth being repeated in such countless worlds. There may be souls in other stars, but I doubt that they have any living bodies attached to them. But come, Mrs. Bold, let us put our bonnets and walk around the close. If we are to discuss sidereal questions, we should do so much better under the towers of the cathedral than stuck in this narrow window." Mrs. Bold made no objection, and the party made to walk out. It's a beautiful night, in beautiful grounds, with a huge moon overhead. Charlotte Stanhope well knew the rule as to three being no company. That once upon a time that was, now we say three's company. Two's company, three's a crowd. But once upon a time, three is not company. You need to pair up. Three is not enough people. It's awkward. And she therefore had to induce her sister to allow Mr. Slope to accompany them, because Mr. Slope is sitting with Madeline Stanhope, who cannot go out walking around on the grounds. "Come, Mr. Slope," said she. "I'm sure you'll join us. We shall be in again in a quarter of an hour, Madeline." Madeline read in her eye all that she had to say, knew her object, and as she had to depend on her sister for so many of her amusements, she felt that she must yield. It was hard to be left alone while others of her own age walked out to feel the soft influence of the bright night, but it would be harder still to be without the sort of sanction which Charlotte gave to all her flirtations and intrigues, an important reminder that Madeline Maroney is young. Uh, Charlotte's eyes told her that she must give up just at present for the good of the family, and so Madeline obeyed. But Charlotte's eyes said nothing of the sort to Mr. Slope. He had no objection at all to a tete-a-tete with the signora, which the departure of which the three would allow, and gently whispered to her, "I shall not leave you alone." "Oh, yes," she said, "go, pray go, for my sake. Do not think that I am so selfish. It is understood that nobody is kept within for me." That has a long history. That comment has a long history behind it. You will understand this too when you know me better. Pray join them, Mr. Slope, but when you come in, speak to me for 5 minutes before you leave us. Mr. Slope understood that he was to go, and therefore joined the party in the hall. He would have had no objection at all to this arrangement if he could have secured Mrs. Bold's arm, but this, of course, was out of the question. Indeed, his fate was very soon settled, for no sooner had he reached the hall door than Miss Stanhope put her arm within his arm, and Bertie walked off with Eleanor just as naturally as though she were already his property. And so they sallied forth. First they walked round the close, according to their own avowed intent. Then they went under the old arched gateway below St. Cuthbert's little church, and then they turned behind the grounds of the bishop's palace, and so on till they came to the bridge just at the edge of town, from which passers-by can look down into the gardens of Hiram's Hospital. And here Charlotte and Mr. Slope, who were in advance, stopped till the others came up to them. Mr. Slope knew that the gable ends and the old brick chimneys which stood up so prettily in the moonlight were those of Mr. Harding's late abode, and would not have stopped on such a spot, in such company, if he could have avoided it. But Miss Stanhope would not take the hint which he gave. "Do you want to come up on the couch, baby?" "No? Good. Do you want to go up on the couch?" Oh. It's having a very lazy day here. I don't know why. There's lots to be done. We're having a very lazy day. Let's see. Let's continue on. Our party is wandering in the moonlight, and it's wasted on them. I should probably point that out. Charlotte Stanhope talks about how the beautiful harvest moon is, and how it can't go disregarded. But she only means it as an artifice to help Bertie woo Eleanor Bold. None of them care about the beautiful things they're looking at, which is a terrible shame. "It is a very pretty place, Mrs. Bold," said Charlotte. "By far the prettiest place near Barchester. I wonder your father gave it up." It was a very pretty place, and now by the deceitful light of the moon looked twice larger, twice prettier, twice more antiquely picturesque than it ever would have done in truth-telling daylight. Who does not know the air of complex multiplicity and the mysterious, interesting grace which the moon always lends to old gabled buildings, half surrounded, as was the hospital, by fine trees? As seen from the bridge on the night which we are speaking, Mr. Harding's late abode did look very lovely, and though Eleanor did not grieve at her father's having left it, she felt at the moment an intense wish that he might be allowed to return. "Oh, Bean, what are you doing? Oh, what are you doing? This isn't your side of the couch." Okay, sorry. A little bit. We've got the Bean on the other side. What are you doing over there? Okay, all right. I'm gathering that her window seat was too chilly. Sorry, she's rather stealing the show here. He is going to return to it almost immediately, is he not? Asked Bertie. So they don't know. This is a perfect illustration of what I'm talking about. They're X factors. They don't know the situation about the hospital. They don't know about the war that is going on where they have landed. Eleanor made no immediate reply. Many such a question passes unanswered without the notice of the questioner, but such was not now the case. They all remained silent as though expecting her to reply, and after a moment or two, Charlotte said, "I believe it is settled that Mr. Harding returns to the hospital, is it not?" "Mr. Slope's right there." "Oh, I don't think that anything is settled just yet," said Eleanor. "But it must be a matter of course," said Bertie. "That is, if your father wishes it. Who else on earth could hold it after what has occurred?" Eleanor quietly made her companion understand that the matter was one she could not discuss in the present company, and then they passed on. Charlotte said she would go a short way up the hill out of town so as to look back on the towers of the cathedral, and as Eleanor leant on Bertie's arm for assistance in the walk, she told him how the matter stood between her father and the bishop. "And he," said Bertie, pointing on to Mr. Slope, "what part does he take in it?" Eleanor explained how Mr. Slope had at first endeavored to tyrannize over her father, but how he had lately come round and done all he could to talk the bishop over in Mr. Harding's favour. "But my father," said she, "is hardly inclined to trust him. They all say he is so arrogant, to the old clergyman of the city. "Take my word for it," said Bertie, "your father is right. If I'm not very much mistaken, that man is both arrogant and false." Bertie hardly ever says anything like this. Is that an indication that when he does, it must be true? That's what he says about Mr. Slope. "If I'm not very much mistaken, that man is both arrogant and false." Is he true? I mean, we know that he's right about Mr. Slope, but is he saying it because he's had that insight or because he's trying to ice out a rival? Anyway, they strolled up to the top of the hill and then returned through the fields by a footpath which leads by a small wooden bridge, or rather a plank with a rustic rail to it, over the river to the other side of the cathedral from that at which they had started. They had thus walked round the bishop's grounds, through which the river runs, and round the cathedral and adjacent fields, and it was past 11 before they reached the doctor's door. "It is very late," said Eleanor. "It would be a shame to disturb your mother again at such an hour." "Oh," said Charlotte, laughing, "you won't disturb Mamma. I dare say she is in bed by this time, and Madeline would be furious if you did not come in and see her. Come, Bertie, take Mrs. Bowles' bonnet from her." They went upstairs and found the Signora alone, reading. She looked somewhat sad and melancholy, but not more so perhaps than was sufficient to excite additional interest in the bosom of Mr. Slope. And she was soon deep in whispered intercourse with that happy gentleman, who was allowed to find the resting place on her sofa. The Signora had a way of whispering that was peculiarly her own, and was exactly the reverse of that which prevails among great tragedians. The great tragedian hisses out a positive whisper, made with bated breath, and produced by inarticulated, tongue-formed sounds, and yet he is audible throughout the whole house. The Signora, however, had no hisses, and produced all her words in a clear, silver tone, but they could only be heard by the ear into which they were poured. Charlotte hurried and scurried about the room hither and thither, doing or pretending to do many things, and then saying something about seeing her mother, ran upstairs. Eleanor was thus left alone with Bertie, and she hardly felt an hour fly by. So midnight. To give Bertie his due, he could not have played his cards better. He did not make love to her, nor sigh, nor look languishing, but he was amusing and familiar, yet respectful. And when he left Eleanor at her own door at 1 o'clock, which he did by the by with the assistance of the now jealous Slope, she thought that he was one of the most agreeable men, and the Stanhopes decidedly the most agreeable family that she had ever met. And that is chapter 19, which is a social club. That's all that it is. And it's oddly muted. It's an oddly muted chapter. We don't get any fireworks between Mr. Slope and Bertie Stanhope. And we don't get anything in the way of understanding from poor Eleanor Bowles. Our narrator is constantly interjecting to say, "Poor Eleanor, oh poor Eleanor," which is a thing. When you read a lot of Trollope, you see that is an interjection that he tends to make when he has crafted a character as a 4-alarm fire gold carat imbecile, and has no intention of ever having them learn anything until the last minute, when their learning will have dramatic effect. But, a small child or a well-trained monkey would be able to tell by now what's going on. Eleanor Bowles is literally the only person in all of Barchester who doesn't know what's going on in an evening like the one described here. We're told that Bertie plays his cards right, that he doesn't try to shatter the illusion that they are good friends. But we know that's not his intent, and everyone else in the room knows it too. It's kind of amazing that Eleanor Bowles is literally surrounded by would-be suitors and has no idea that that's on their mind at all. In fact, is so far deceived that she can end the evening by thinking the Stanhopes are wonderful people, that they're just the most wonderful family, when we have been, the narrator has gone out of the way to show us that's not true. Anyway, that is our next chapter, Barchester Towers, and we will move on from here. Now, I want to give you a advance warning. Chapter 20 is called Mr. Arabin. So in chapter 20, we will finally be fully and properly introduced to this new paladin who enters the ranks on one side or another of the war in Barchester Close. So we'll do that next time, and I will see you then. Thank you, Booktube.